Long days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam. I am known on this level of the tower as Jaime Fuego.
I'm Cecil Laird.
And we are doing a special comic book review that fits kind of in the Kingverse, albeit this time with his son Joe Hill and all of the awesome comic book stuff that he has done, most notably for Wraith, which is a prequel, just additional backstory, filling in things all about Charlie Manx and not only how he became the nasty character which we are introduced to in NOS4A2, but also just a little crazy story involving some escaped convicts in Christmas Land. Amazing artwork. The artwork is really the top thing on display in this for me. The storytelling,
And you said by Charles Paul Wilson III, right?
I did not say that. Charles Paul Wilson III. He works with Gabriel Rodriguez so much that I just, Anyway, Jay Photos, who basically colors like everything for Joe. Shout out to Jay. We love you, man.
He colors so much that we don't even realize until I read it.
Yeah, and yet he still teaches at the college level and does so much other stuff. He has his own comic books that he writes and illustrates and inks himself and colors. And I mean, that guy, as our friend, is way more into the industry than we really give credit or realize. But yes, so essentially, the backstory of Wraith, I read it when we were driving back from LA, and then I breezed back through it the other night, and then I took a few just other looks at it tonight, just trying to refresh myself with a few of the story beats, trying to remember every aspect of it, because I remembered it pretty well, but the artwork, as Cecil is displaying for you, is what genuinely stands out, because even the Manx backstory is very minimal, you know, and then, yeah. The art is gruesome. It's bloody. It's nasty. And this guy, the entirety throughout NOS4A2, he just wanted to get to Christmas Land.
I did, and I was so excited to finally get there.
You spend a good chunk of the story in Christmas Land. I'd say you don't really get there officially till issue 3.
I didn't like this better than NOS4A2, but this filled in what I felt NOS4A2 was missing.
Yeah.
And I got to see all of the things that they even talked about. Scissors for the Drifter was the game the kids play. We finally got to see. We got to see what the sleigh coaster looked like. We got to see a bunch of different things about Christmas Land that you only could imagine in your own head. And we've established on this show that I like to see things rather than have to necessarily imagine them. I'm fine doing that for books, but I would rather see. I mean, I would rather see, again, there's stuff at the back here that is a layout, like a splash page layout of Christmas Land.
Yeah, which is one cool thing that
so amazing.
If you pick up this hardcover of it, which collects all of the different issues in the miniseries, you have a ton of just concept work for specific scenes, for covers, like just pencils and things like that, which is one of the reasons why in an age where everybody goes digital and they're using their Comixology or they're using their streaming services or they're just downloading stuff or whatever, that having something physical and tangible in your hands to just page through all of this awesomeness, I mean, it's
one
really,
shot
it's
of
really
Christmas Land really sells it for me.
Yeah, it's awesome with that half moon and stuff.
You can see the sleigh coaster in the back. You see Charlie's half moon. You see the sort of Hogwarts-esque town leading up to it. It's so cool.
And this is where, when you look at, I can almost say the crude nature of the pencils. That's where the inking and the color from someone like Jay really brings so much vibrance and life to the storytelling with those images, man.
Absolutely.
Really,
even if the images are largely prisoners in orange jumpsuits.
Well, that's what you get halfway through, and that's as I told you, I'm
not halfway through. There's a prologue. There's 8 issues total. That story is 6 issues. Dude.
It's 6 issues, but it's bookended by essentially Manx and how he becomes who he is, and then strangely enough, and
the origin of how of the person that makes him.
Mr. Lamarck in a very weird visual fashion that's still behind the same artist, but totally different. It's almost like
the last issue.
It's almost like comic strippy series.
Well, the last issue is still done in prose.
Yeah,
but you can see they do artwork along the way. So it's the last issue is told in prose. The last of 8.
It almost feels to me like what they
didn't do it for me.
I actually really like it. I almost feel
I like the first issue and I like the next 6, but I was not a big fan of that one personally.
It's similar to what they did with certain parts of Watchmen. in my estimation.
Okay.
You know, but long story short, Charlie Manx, when you get his like backstory, you find out when he was born. Like, they don't directly spell it out, but they say at one particular point, they're like, well, it's when Billy the Kid was running around and shooting people and so on and so forth. So you gauge
early 1900s.
It's, well, maybe even late 1800s. Yeah. And his father is killed by some fat whore, and then his mother is a whore herself, and he's sleeping in a coffin down in the basement because his mom is basically, it's the place where they reside is a dueling spot. It's a mortuary on one side, and then on the other side it's a place for guests to stay and rest their heads and stuff. And his mom is performing nasty acts, and there is back to Joe's sensibilities of just nastiness, where his mother can't please one particular person, and there is an interaction in the snow where he is first kind of discovering his powers when that same man encounters him. It's horrible, dude. It's like he's left bloodied and disgraced and desecrated, and it's gross. And the one thing that I have mixed feelings about that Joe very deliberately does with Wraith, he makes you sympathize with Manx. He makes you sympathize. He turns him almost into an anti-hero, especially especially with the person who becomes the main bad in the middle story that takes up the biggest chunk, the Carney guy, you know, and everything that transpires with him. Yeah, he makes Manx kind of somebody you want to root for to some degree. He makes him like a Freddy Krueger.
That's true.
Genuinely does.
That's true.
He really, really does. And when you see why in the NOS4A2 novel he's complaining about, you know, women suck you dry, they do this, they do that, without really divulging too much, he escapes to Kansas, I want to say, because he grows up in Colorado.
Can't remember,
he grows up in Colorado, so he's used to cold and darkness, as he says. Hi, Lily. And beyond that, he's like, I have to get out of this situation, this cyclical cycle and everything that's entailed with it. And he meets this girl who, when her rich father is coming to have her tour like the air base and everything, because flight and, you know, the Wright brothers is so new at the time when this story is being told. He's like their driver, and he takes her to the airfield and to the theater and all this other stuff, and he ends up romancing her and winning her heart. They get married, but then suddenly the father dies after realizing fortune is lost, and so it seemed like everything was set in stone, everything was going hunky-dory great, and then he has to start busting his ass hardcore. He's working the fields. They have multiple children. The wife is bitching at him, not satisfied, being very, very negative, and she's not the sweet spirit that he fell in love with, and so he is growing colder and darker, but he's looking for some sort of sanctity, some sort of salvation to repair this family rift that's growing larger and larger. And it comes in the form of Mr. Lamarck. And he is indeed a mark. He's somebody who's going around swindling and huckleberrying and grifting everybody. Unfortunately, Manx doesn't know that, and
Manx falls victim, and it ruins his life.
Yeah, ruins his his life is pretty much lost from that point without really. And this is all in the prologue, so we're not divulging everything, guys.
Very
but
first issue.
When you see him purchase that car, and he puts all that money into Christmas Land, and when they drive there and the kids are starting to transform, and they get there and they realize it's nothing, and then they start chewing on the mother, and everything is so messed up. I was like, I know where this story is going, and Joe Hill writes this. You know, it's not like he's passing the baton, much like his dad does for a lot of his properties. Joe has a lot of time in the comic world with Lock and Key and various other things like the Cape and so on. And
then the middle section of the book is the 6 issues is, a group of prisoners.
It's an unrelated story. Really.
It's an unrelated story. A group of prisoners basically happen across Christmas Land after having an accident in their transport bus, and so.
One of them knows Manx.
One of them knows Manx. Yeah, that's right. And then Manx takes them to Christmas Land.
And he's wearing
escape.
the Elton John sunglasses and everything. And,
so it's this group of criminals that run afoul of Christmas Land, essentially, and all the things that they talk about doing to people in the actual NOS4A2 novel, we actually get to see in this, which is why I really liked this trade, or this hardcover. I enjoyed the hell out of it.
Hardcover.
I enjoyed the stories about Charlie Manx and the origin about it, and then I also enjoyed the criminal story. It's very reminiscent of Exit to Hell and reminiscent of what Voorhees is going to be.
I was just about to say,
that.
Shout out to Cody for a similar idea but it's in the public consciousness. It's like the evil against more nasty, deliberate evil and stuff. Although I would even probably say that what Cody's trying to do with Voorhees is of a similar vein, where it's like it's a killer who is super evil that you root for. It's the Freddy vibe, like I said.
Absolutely.
Know? And the fact that one guy is a carny. And he's talking the whole time about raping the old woman who's the other officer and all that other stuff. And there is interesting backstory about how, so there's these 3 prisoners in the vehicle after it makes the crash and everything. One is a rapist, nasty piece of crap. The other one is the more sadistic, violent, carny guy. And then the other one is the father who went over the edge because he takes his son to this hospital. He's like, my son is dying. They wouldn't treat him. My son is dying. What is going on? And he ends up in custody because of the fact that he goes back after his son has died, and he's just screaming and freaking out on this doctor and the secretary, assistant, whatever, as they're drunk at a holiday party and all this other stuff, and he's got guns. And that's how he ends up in this situation. And he's got kind of a weird mild romance thing going on with the older lady, which is not so. But an interesting callback that they do in this, where he's thinking back to his son and holding up all the balloons, and how many balloons would it take for me to float all the way up to the top? That is a direct callback to Pop Art, which is a short story that Joe Hill did, where this kid has a friend who is basically, he has no interiors of sorts. He's just... that he's full of air, and this kid is picked on, and it's almost like a parable analogy, whatever type thing, for having a friend who's disabled, and so everybody picks on them and whatever. But if they decide they don't want to live anymore, and they're like, how many balloons would it take for me to just hold and float my thin, lifeless body up to the sky? I think that's what Joe was doing with this, but I can't say for sure. But that's the vibe that I got in some of these flashback scenes, because he's scarred because of his son dying, and his son was attaching all these notes to all these balloons, which is pretty dope. But honestly, once we get to Christmas Land, I feel like the storytelling stunts a little bit, and it just goes from beat of gore to beat of gore to beat of gore, because the one guy's throwing on a top hat, and that's just kind of bloody. I liked it. And then there's the other guy who, the little bear kid, is like, no, sometimes I feel like I don't want to do this anymore. I'll take you over here and I'll help you. And then he brings him to these, like, there's tigers and all this stuff, and they're all chewing them apart and ripping them to pieces.
it was a carousel. And the tiger was one of the animals, and it came to life and started eating him. Yeah, that was dope.
Yeah, and then the one guy and the older cop lady are hiding in the Ferris wheel, and the moon sees them, and he
starts yelling.
Yeah, and a great scene is where the carny who was trying to basically steal the Wraith and escape, like he becomes the real bad guy in this story. When Manx is like, you're just gonna have to shoot me in the head.
Yeah. Okay, like, wow, all right, yeah, interesting.
Good end to an issue, I gotta say,
So I liked it. It seems I enjoyed it more than you.
I appreciated it more as I was breezing again. Like, when I first read it when we were going back from California that day, I can't say I was a big fan. But as far as world building goes, as far as how terrific the artwork is, dude, it is bloody. It spares no expense for being nasty.
I think it's a great little side story.
Small children chewing the faces and like limbs off.
More than like this whole section. Like, wow, okay,
even with the 2 daughters and
that's what I'm saying.
Wife, like. That's what I'm saying. It's gory. So honestly, I wouldn't necessarily recommend reading this before.
No, I would read NOS4A2 first if you're willing.
Yeah, but this is.
But it still holds its own.
It is terrific supplemental content, especially in the artistic department. It's badass, and I mean, as far as what this gets me excited about, I cannot wait to do more Joe comic reading, whether it's Lock and Key, The Cave, whatever else. So
all of it is good.
I'm all for it.
All of it is good, except for that thing he did with his dad.
Yeah.
Road Rage. It was terrible. Did not like Road Rage. Anyway.
Road Rage, the source material, I cannot remember what it's called. It was basically Richard Matheson inspired. But
anyway, doesn't matter.
Last thing we have in this, though, before we forget, is just the weird tale of the guy who turns the tables on Manx.
Lamarck.
Mr. Lamarck. It's called Phantoms. It's the epilogue, and you sympathize with him initially because of the fact that his brother drowns and all this other stuff, and he has this older guy who is kind of taking care of them, but is not a relative. He's just like a fatherly type figure. And then you meet this girl, and the younger guy and the girl, they kind of fall in love in the midst of the grifting and her jumping into bed with people and the jealous husband coming into play and all this other stuff. But
oh, excuse me, sorry.
Manx gets his revenge in an interesting fashion with this particular character, which, while I would agree with you, the storytelling fashion with it, with the minimal images, and it's very text heavy, I can't say it's that particularly compelling. It's really very much...
It's a slowdown for the rest of the book.
Yeah,
sure.
and it's very much like the way I approached that Diary of Ellen Rimbauer, where it's all prose giving you backstory that, unless you really care about the mythology and the history of those characters, you're probably really going to be just lost and just unengaged. And even if you are that down with the storytelling, you might not even like that much. But I did like the payoff with when Lamarck meets Manx again. I thought that was kind of cool, and where you assume the whole time he's responsible for a few things that happen in the marriage, disappearances of kids and stuff like that. So as a whole, I really enjoyed this, but I can't say I loved it. However, this and NOS4A2 together are a damn good combination.
Absolutely. So why don't you guys let us know in the comments down below. Have you heard of Wraith? Are you interested in it? Are you going to read NOS4A2 and then give this a try?
Do it!
Just try this without it. Since it's the graphic novel, you guys saw some of the artwork. It looks pretty badass. So it is definitely worth your time. Let us know what your thoughts are in those comments. Until next time, though, I've been Cecil Laird.
Gracias, I've been Jaime.
And remember, stay scared.